One of the conversations I saw you had with Jordan Peterson after some of the experiences he had, medical problems, that you had a conversation with him, and he came to tears thinking about, again, this participatory and like this logo stuff, which it seems like he has his finger on most of it, but when it comes to it literally incarnating, that it
Mm.
was an actual historical person, that God became a man, and it's not some pragmatic truth we live by, but it's a reality. I remember you telling him that, and it brought him to tears because it's the only thing that makes all of what he's talking about come back together, because that's what the incarnation is. It's the recapitulation of everything back into the participation of God.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that's the hardest thing. It's like, it's the hardest sell for secular people, because people are so ruined. Like, we're so ruined, and there's a way, like the way that I tend to try to do that is I tend to go slowly and try to show people the story of Jesus, because it's, we can say that like Jesus, the incarnation is the summit of the world, right? It's the place where heaven and earth meet. It's the place where the divine logos, empties himself into, and all these terms, they sound so weird, but it's really there in the story, right? Jesus's story is a crazy story where everything collapses and everything is united and everything is,
Right.
It's an amazing thing. You just kind of, especially for secular people, you just kind of have to bring them in slowly, because the story of the crucifixion will just shatter you once you start to see it, like for what's actually going
Right.
on in that story. It's a crushing story. It's like everything is there, like the whole cosmos is in that story.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more. Can we speak a little bit more then about the incarnation, and why this is so essential for this logos theology and for what we were talking about, theosis? Because we're called to participate in God, and by the grace of God, in the engagement with his uncreated energies, if we as created entities, which are limited, can engage with these uncreated energies of logic and reason and love and mercy and compassion and truth and beauty and honor and glory, we can become more and more like God. This is the gift of God's incarnation. This is the opportunity that we're all called to. And then the cross, again, we could get into the semiotics of it being this point in which all this stuff fully comes back together. Could you speak a little bit to the importance of the incarnation in regards to all this logos theology?
I mean, the incarnation is the key, and it's a key. It really is a key. It's a key in terms of story. It's a key in terms of understanding. Because one of the things, for example, like even if you take Jungian ideas, right? There's a sense in which we have this problem, which is that intelligence seems to be the characteristic of humans, and so even in the old world, they would ask questions sometimes, like, "Are the gods? Do they exist? Are there a projection of us, like a
Mm-hmm.
projection of our own psychic, our psychic thoughts and our own
Mm-hmm.
structures of mind?" And so there's actually a legitimate concern about that and a legitimate question, but that gets solved in the incarnation, because it's in some ways you could say this is a crazy thing, but it's totally orthodox, by the way, is to say that the man Jesus Christ created the world.
Yes.
And like St. Maximus says crazy things. He says, when Christ was on the cross, he was creating the world. And so it's like, yeah, it's like
Exactly.
that solves, people don't realize just how many problems that solves, even in terms of metaphysics and in terms of understanding, the nature of the world, and how we don't have to deny the fact that intelligent categories mirror through the human mind. It's actually not a problem. It's
Right.
actually our role. It's actually what we're there for. That's what God created us, is to be that intermediary, intermediary space between the invisible principles and the indefinite aspect of the world. And so, but that culminates, right? So it's like the whole structure is like this structure that points and points and points. And so just like in you, let's say there's that noetic aspect, where it all comes together and you have that space, the eye of the heart, where you can encounter God. All the cosmos also has that same structure. It's like it points, it points, it points. And
Right.
then when the figure of Jesus Christ appears, it's like, that's it. That's the point. That's that point where it all comes together, and it's objectively real in the story. You can see why it's real in the way that Jesus interacts with people, what he's doing, all the different prophecies that he's kind of bringing together
Yep.
towards the cross. But then it's the surprise, man, the surprise of the cross. Like, who could have expected that? Like,
Right.
who could? And then, but when it happens and you realize that this is it, like, this is the only way that it can be real. And it has to do with what we talked about in terms of the logi.
Mhm.
Like, reality can only be fully real if it's constantly emptying itself. If it's constantly emptying itself, both in some ways like towards God, but then also even higher identities always have to kind of empty themselves to give themselves to the lower participation.
Right.
Because, you can't have the pure cup. You only have a mitigated version of that. And so the
Right.
cup gives itself, right? It kind of gives itself towards its participation with its particulars. So
Right.
you're like, oh, that's what it is. That's what
Yep.
this whole sacrifice thing from the beginning has been. Like,
Yep.
these people kind of trying to figure out, like, why do we, we're sacrificing these animals, we're sacrificing people. Like, what are we doing? What is this thing we're doing? And the cross just resolves it all. It's like, yeah, that's actually how the world works.
Right.
Right
The
there.
cross ends that process in a sort of profane way and brings it all back together in a single person, which recapitulates that, like, as you and Jordan Peterson talked about, the limit story. I mean, the story of Christ, which isn't a story, it's a reality, but you couldn't write something that is more to the
Yeah, you
limits
can't.
of categories.
Yeah, you can't. You just cannot. I would dare anybody to do it. You could only maybe do something similar in the wake of the story of Jesus. But
Right.
think just about what's going on. Like, just think about the cross. Like, think about, here's Jesus, innocent, crucified as a criminal on the cross with a sign above his head that says he's the king, which is ironic, but is not ironic. Ultimately, it's like this weird thing where it's like, it's irony, and it's a double irony, and a triple irony. It's as if the whole world is it's like turned in this tumbler where, it all just collapses.
Right, king of the Jews, but the Jews then are killing him for claiming that he's or fulfilling the prophecies of the Old Testament. And so this whole thing, and then being humiliated, he's God incarnate, but then he's naked in front of his mother. I mean, the whole thing is you literally could not write something that was more limit in every dimension. And I love what you're talking about, the sort of dissension on high to the lowly places. And that's what the Logi is doing. And that's why Christ was concerned with the prostitutes, with the poor, with the sick, with the people, the lowest people of society, and that's why the last will be first. The lowly will be elevated. This is the reality of God. This is, I had Father Turbo on, and he was talking about, we did a whole stream on the theology of humility. And one of the biggest takeaways I had on that, he said, why is the ocean the most powerful body of water? It's because it's the lowest body of water.
Yeah.
All other bodies of water flow back into the ocean. That's what God is. God had to humble himself as the lowest so that everything can return back to him. And it's like, wow, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, the story of Jesus, it's just crazy. It's a crazy story. You can never get to the end of it. Every time I go back, every Pascha, especially during this, some of the services, like especially the services of lamentation, those services, they did just crush you. There's some, what is it, that sentence it says, talks about Jonah, but referring to Christ. It says Jonah came out of the fish as if from the bridal chamber. And it's like, came out of the monster as if from a bridal chamber. So can you have images like that anywhere else? Like this crazy contraction of anyways. And it's weird because then you see in scripture, right, it talks about the idea that, the lamb that was sacrificed before the foundation of the world. And so the cross is actually revealing something. Like, it's not just an answer to sin. It's revealing a very deep mystery, which is actually the very origin of creation itself.
Right.
Timothy Petitza has a wonderful image in his book, the Ethics of Beauty, where he's speculating, obviously, but his speculation is quite powerful. He says one of the things, he has this image where when Adam took the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and he was able to see the tree of life, right? So it's like, it worked, right? It's like, if you take the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then you have access to the tree of life. Then when he came to the tree of life, he saw the cross and he saw Christ on the cross, and
Right.
he couldn't handle it. Right.
Right.
It was way too much. It's like, that's not what he thought he would see there, and that's one of the reasons why he freaked out and covered himself and ran away, basically, because it was
Right.
just too much to
Right.
deal with.